Welcome to NetworkingRX, a podcast devoted to helping business professionals like you enhance your networking skills in order to become more proficient giving and receiving quality business referrals and improving the overall quality of your life and the lives of those around you. The NetworkingRX Podcast is a production of AmSpirit Business Connections, an organization whose mission is to empower business success through networking.
Welcome to the NetworkingRX Podcast. I'm your host, Frank Agin, founder and president of AmSpirit Business Connections. Today we have another awesome guest on. I've got Morag on. She is a sought-after speaker, executive coach, and leadership development expert. And she's the author of Cultivate, The Power of Winning Relationships. And she has another book called The Future-Proof Workplace. She is the CEO and founder of SkyTeam, which is an international leadership development firm. And she supports the development, or has supported over the years, the development of more than 10,000 leaders from 20 countries and 4 continents. For fun, you will find her playing the bassoon or ballroom dancing when we're allowed to get out of the social distancing thing. Mm-hmm. Who knows when that's going to happen? But welcome to the program. Thanks for being here.
My pleasure, Frank. I'm looking forward to the conversation.
Well, what I'd like to talk about, I've got a copy of the book Cultivate, The Power of Winning Relationships. And I will, for our listeners out there, this is a great book to get. A lot of times you'll get books and it'll be, somebody will talk about a concept and then they'll go 10, 20 pages of filler stories and things that kind of support the concept. There's a lot to this book. And what Morag's done in the book is she talks about what she terms 4 relationship dynamics. And I really want to kind of dig into these dynamics and have you, we'll just kick these around. I'll name them real quickly and then we'll start in an order that you think makes the most sense. I know in the book that I think it's adversaries was the last one that you covered. Yeah. But there's adversary, ally, rival, and supporter. So I don't want to start with adversaries. It sounds like it's the last one for a reason.
They're the hardest to deal with. Yeah. So, I mean, that's part of it. And with adversaries, it's overt or covert. Overt, you know who's out to get you.
Right.
Covert, you just know that something's up. Maybe you're hearing things third hand about what somebody said or didn't say, but you don't know where the salvos are coming from, which is why you need an ally. So the ultimate premise of the book is, who's your ally? Who's the person that has your back, not just on the good days when it's easy, Frank, but more especially on the tough days when it's hitting the fan, when things aren't going to the plan. Who's the person who's going to step up and step into that arena with you and help you to navigate that?
No, I think that's an important point to make. And I mean, it's one of those things where it's like, okay, that's obvious. But as I indicated before we hit record, these 4 dynamics are things I see and was thinking about as I'm going through the book, but I never compartmentalize people like that, right? And even when you're saying covert and overt, okay, I see that as well. There are people where there's a gut reaction. Something's not right. You have a sense about it.
Yeah.
And you talk about that later in the book. You talk about the brain and the limbic system and a mammalian brain and so on and so forth. But so on the one hand, you have the allies, and then you have the adversaries, and then we have rivals and supporters. How do they fit in?
So let me just go back to the beginning. So my first career, 15 years in commercial finance. And I worked on the basis that if I worked hard, if I kept my head down, if I did a good job, I'd get on. And I remember being told at the time, business it's not personal, it's just business. And so I believed what I'd been told at high school and what I'd been told in my studies, that work hard and you will be successful. But what I realized in my banking career, if it was all about the numbers and the spreadsheet and the logic and the transaction of business, then why weren't all companies successful? Why weren't all teams and why weren't all individuals successful? There's a hidden element, and that hidden element is the human element. Yeah. And I've turned that adage of it's not personal, it's just business on its head. Business is personal and relationships matter. And at the time, I didn't have a language and framework to understand how to nurture and where to invest my time, not just to help me to succeed, but to help us, the team, the organization to succeed. And so that's where the relationship ecosystem and the 4 relationship dynamics came into play. And what they do is they trade off between the me first, which is an adversary or a rival perspective. How do I get ahead? What can I get from you, Frank? What's in it for me? To a we first, which is the ally or supporter mindset around how do we succeed and learn and grow together. And think about it, in most organizations, it doesn't matter whether you're a small, nimble boutique firm like SkyTeam or one of our largest clients like Google or the National Geographic Society, the quality of relationships matter. And if you've got sales pointing the finger at operations, who are pointing the finger at IT, who's pointing the finger at HR, then all of that internal infighting is slowing you down, slowing down the company, but also impacting individual leadership reputations and impact every single day. So it's down to us to pay attention to who are we dependent on for our success. And there's the usual suspects of your boss, there's your direct reports, your up and down its team members. But then what do you do? How do you understand the health of the relationship, which is where the ecosystem comes in and the ally, supporter, rival, and adversary? And then once you've diagnosed the health of the relationship, what can you do to not be a victim and move things forward? So the ally is the most critical relationship. And my advice is you need at least one at work. And it's the person who has your back no matter what. But not in a little house on the prairie, skipping through the daisies, everything's lovely, Frank sort of way. The ally is the one that's going to give you the tough love too, the kick in the pants when you need it. Right. When something doesn't go to plan, they're not just going to go, oh, never mind, Frank, you'll get over it, toughen up, cupcake. They're going to say, yeah, Frank, that's up, but here's what we can do together to help you to get your career back on track. So here's a little bit of audience participation for everybody who's listening. For you, Frank, I want you to think about the people who have helped you to get to where you are today. And think about the people that if they called you right now and said, hey, Frank, I've got this great opportunity, I'd love to work with you on it, that you'd jump at the chance to go work with them. So do you have somebody in mind?
Well, I probably have several people. Now, I'm self-employed and been self-employed for 25 years and have lots of allies in my life. People that when I used to practice law, when I was in business, when I was practicing law, got into business with one particular individual, totally enjoyed it, ended up selling to an investor. And when he calls, it's like, hey, let's do lunch. Okay, when? Just, I'll put him in my calendar. And there are certainly people in my organization, franchisees that I know I can count on. Like you say, not just to support me when I need it. Hey, I need this done, but to give it to me straight, because I have a blind spot like everybody else, right? And I not overthink. I'm not a great critic of myself. Right?
None of us are.
No, I know.
We judge ourselves from our intent, which is always invariably to do a good job and to be successful, but others judge us by our impact and how it landed. Yeah. And so sometimes we need those loving critics who can say, we know you were trying to help Morag, but when you use this word or phrase, here's how it switched people off. So tell me a little bit more about this partner where you went to the investors. You'll always put them on the calendar if they call for lunch. What is it about that person that makes them come to mind? What makes them special for you?
We had a good working relationship. He involved me years ago. This is going back 25 years now, and ultimately divested of it almost 10 years ago. But we've had lots of conversations here and there. But he he valued what I could bring to the table. And we fought, and not, I mean, they weren't bitter blowouts, but, we didn't agree all the time. And would always kind of circle back and just kind of do a post-mortem of whatever the disagreement was, and him getting out, hey, this is what I didn't like, and me sharing, well, this is what I didn't like, and this is what I'm going to do going forward. And it was a great relationship.
I love it. And Frank, if we could get your listeners to actually share their stories, here's what I know I would hear. I would hear that they believed in me more than I believed in myself. They gave me the tough feedback that was pivotal, that I couldn't see. They were a cheerleader even when I wasn't in the room. They made me feel successful. And here's the theme. It's rarely about how smart they were or the results that they achieved. It is all about how they made me feel. And there's a great Dr. Maya Angelou quote that people won't remember what you said or what you did. They'll remember how you made them feel. And that's your allies. And when you talk about it, as I said at the beginning, it's not Little House on the Prairie, everything's perfect. You're still going to disagree. And if you want to go nose to nose, toe to toe, in terms of having those disagreements, that's fine. Because what's different with an ally relationship is when we leave that interaction, that conflict, that fight, that disagreement, the relationship is actually strengthened. Because it's done from I care, and I want you to understand not only where your perspective may be misaligned, but where I'm coming from. And when an adversary or a rival disagrees, we tend to shut down, we tend to stop listening, we discount it, and the relationship is invariably damaged, both for us and for any innocent bystander spectators, because the next time we come together, I'm now filtering, I'm wearing a mask, I'm hoping not to be in your crosshairs. Whereas with an ally, we can move on and move forward together. And that is powerful. Google did a lot of research on what makes for high-performing teams. And what they found was it's not necessarily putting the smartest people in the room together. It comes from a foundation of psychological safety. And psychological safety, trust, is built one relationship and one conversation at a time. So think what would be possible, whether you're a solopreneur, a small business owner, or part of a large organization. If we had a culture of psychological safety and trust, if we had relationships built on the ally mindset that I talk about in my book, Cultivate, anything becomes possible. We take informed risk. We're willing to continue to raise the bar and outcompete each other, but in a way where we celebrate each other's success versus knocking you down so that I can win. And that is what it means to both have and to be an ally.
Now, that sounds simple, but we know that simple is not easy. What gets in the way of people becoming allies?
That's a really good question. And the work that my team and I do, both as individual executive coaches, helping leaders to change their reputation, or within TAC teams and across organizations with our leadership program, it is all built through this concept of how do we build healthy, effective working relationships? Because I believe you cannot be successful in business or in life unless you're successful in nurturing the relationships that come to you and with you as part of the working environment. And here's the thing, we don't actually have to like each other, Frank, but we have to be able to work respectfully together.
Right.
And often the reason that gets in the way is we've not had the role models. We don't have the language and framework. It's often seen as the soft, fluffy stuff of, we'll just toughen up, cupcake, this is business, get on with it.
Right.
But also, we just don't invest that time for deliberate, strategic, how's it going? What's working for you, Frank, and what's not? So in the book, I give a language and framework to understand the 4 dynamics, but then also the tactics that allow you to manage those tougher relationships, the rival and adversary, but also to nurture the supporters and allies so that you know that you can call on them. And like you, with your example, 25 years later, if you called them or vice versa, you know they would take your call and they would help you through a difficult spot. And that's critical.
Yeah, it's interesting because you talk about the Maya Angelou quote, as I was talking about my contact, his name is Dan, Dan Myers, shout out to Dan Myers. I couldn't place our disagreements. I couldn't place the great things, but it was just kind of a feeling that was, that's there. And that's exactly it.
Yep. And one of the most powerful things you can do, and I'm going to challenge everybody who's listening, that person that came to mind for everybody as being the ally or the go-to boss or colleague you'd want to work with, I dare you, I double dog dare you to send them a message. Call them, email them, LinkedIn, I don't care, Facebook, message to the universe if they've passed on. But say you were listening to this podcast, you were thinking about best bosses, best colleagues, allies, and hey, you came to mind and here's why. And I guarantee you're going to get a reply, and I guarantee that you're going to strengthen that relationship even if you haven't spoken to them in years. And that, when you ask, how do you do it? It's one conversation at a time. Yeah. And making the implicit explicit, which is, hey, Frank, I really appreciate you. I appreciate how you show up for me and what we can do together. Because we assume people know the value that they bring, but none of us really get too much recognition or acknowledgement. And none of us don't not like hearing it if I get triple negative in there. Right. We want to understand what's the value and legacy that we're creating. So I challenge everybody listening, that best boss, that best colleague, the ally in your life, go tell them. And I guarantee it strengthens that relationship.
Well, I'm going to take you up on your challenge. As soon as we're done, I will text Dan. I know he'll respond. Yeah. But text is easy. Voicemail, I always go to voicemail. It's always full.
Well, there you go. Find a way. Send them a card, whatever it might be.
Yeah. But you talk about, and you talk about, and you kind of imply that it's one conversation at a time. In time, adversaries can become rivals to supporters to allies. I mean,
yes. So the model shows it as a fluid dynamic. And let's be clear, I wrote the book, but I can still wake up a little grumpy and feisty some days and be adversarial-like to the people who know and care about me. And the problem only becomes when we get stuck. And if we have a foundation where we're spending 80, 90% of our time as ally to ally, then we're more willing to forgive those off days. We're more willing to have that grace and generosity that I'm not being a jerk, there's something else going on, and maybe asking and inquiring, hey, Morag, what's happening for you? You're not yourself.
Right.
So we all move, but it takes a lot of effort to move from adversary to ally. And it takes a great act of neglect for an ally to turn into an adversary overnight, which is why the ecosystem is all about paying attention and understanding who are those critical stakeholders, personally and professionally, that can help or hinder our success today. And that list in 2020 may be different to the list that you had in 2019 or the list that you'll have in 2021. But to identify those 5 or 10 people that require extra care and attention, and what is their starting point and which way are they trending? And that will give you clues as to how frequently and what your tactics might be to nurture and strengthen that relationship dynamic.
As we're talking, and you had me kind of come to mind with my friend Dan as an ally, I can't really think of too many adversaries in my life.
Well, and I hope that's true. Yes. They're handfuls. I mean, I can think back to maybe 1 or 2 serious adversarial relationships in my career, and you have a choice. You either step up and into it. Hopefully I'm not being perceived as the adversary, but it can easily spiral down, especially if I respond like for like, So You were rude to me, I'm going to show you how rude. You interrupted me, I'm going to interrupt you. And before you know it, you've got tit for tat going on, and nobody wins and nobody benefits. And I don't know anybody in my career, those 10,000 leaders that I've worked with, I've yet to meet anybody who gets up in the morning and says, I want to be seen as the brilliant jerk today. I want to see if I can really tick Frank off. I want to see if I can stop this team from delivering on their results. But something I do or say may cause that outcome. So often it's a blind spot. Maybe they've never been held accountable. Maybe it's, the salesperson who's getting amazing results, but it's always clean up on aisle 13 and relationship damage everywhere else.
Right.
Well, there comes a point where that infects the organization. You get collateral damage because everybody's now holding back and hoping not to get into the crosshairs of the adversary. So it behooves the leadership team to say, if this is our culture, what are we willing to tolerate and what are we not? And the first step is feedback. And then it's not rocket science. You either choose to step up or choose to step out and find somewhere else where those behaviors may be welcomed. But here, they're not. So adversaries, I hope, they're few and far between. But when they are, they can be real career derailers and cause us to question our own contribution, our own self-confidence, our own ability to navigate through it, unless you have an ally who's standing there right with you saying, let's do this together.
Well, granted, I am self-employed. I've been self-employed for 20 some years, 25 years. It's easier for me to work with those people, and you're just trying to figure out, okay, if you're going to be an adversary and that's what you're committed to being, I'm going to just divorce you from my life. And I don't ever have to have that conversation, but that's the reality. Mm-hmm. Whereas when you're working for somebody, you don't always get to choose who's in the cubicle next. Yeah, and that's the difference.
That's the difference, but you get to choose how you respond. And ultimately, I'm in the process of writing an article that'll be coming out on LinkedIn shortly around toxic bosses, but it could equally be toxic colleagues. I've even had people, when I've done my keynote on the Cultivate book, come up to me and say, well, what do I do if I have an adversary who reports to me on my team? But there is always something that you can do, up to and including choosing to join a different team or a different organization, somewhere where you can thrive. Because long-term, the stress and the physical and mental impact of always looking over your shoulder and wondering when the next salvo is coming from, it is not a healthy environment.
No.
And you can't change them other than providing feedback. But you can change yourself, how you respond, how you navigate it, and ultimately choosing whether you want to stay or go somewhere else.
Right. No, that's good. We have a few minutes left. I want to get into your work, and how people can get a hold of you, if you don't mind.
Okay, well, getting hold of me, it's Morag, M-O-R-A-G. The advantage of an unusual name is there are not many of us around. It's a Scottish name. And my company name is Skye Team, S-K-Y-E, team.com, named for the Isle of Skye on the west coast of Scotland, because I'm actually Morag MacLeod.
Okay.
So that's how people can get hold of me, morag at skyeteam.com, or find me on LinkedIn. And I personally respond to all the messages that I get. And then the work that we do is, as I say, threefold. We're working with organizations, some very well known and some you've never heard of, all looking to increase their leadership capability to respond, especially in times of ambiguity as we're experiencing in 2020. And then we're working with intact teams. Are we aligned around this table around what the definition of success is, roles and responsibilities? Are we a team of allies? And then we also work with individuals as executive coaches, either helping them to step into that next career transition or anticipate that next adventure, whatever that may bring. And so 3 ways: one to many, one to few, and one to one.
Oh, awesome. I like that. And I will put your email in the show notes as well, so people can have quick access to it if makes the most sense. Well, I really appreciate your time on the call today. Thank you.
Appreciate it, Frank. Wish you every success.
Thanks for joining us on the NetworkingRX Podcast. Please put what you've learned into action today and let us know if you have questions, comments, or ideas for future topics. You can email them to us at podcast@amspirit.com. That's AMSPIRIT.com. Finally, so you never miss an episode, be sure to subscribe to the NetworkingRX Podcast through iTunes, Overcast, or however you receive your podcasts. Now get out and network with someone.
The NetworkingRX Podcast is a copyright production of AmSpirit Business Connection. All rights reserved.